A 6'4" widow was given an impossible choice. Fight another woman in front of hundreds, or lose everything her dead husband left behind. What started as a cruel rancher's twisted contest became something nobody expected. Watch till the end to see how two women turned violence into liberation. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible story tomorrow. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let's continue with the story. The hammer came down on the anvil with a force that shook the walls of the smithy. Ingrid Nordstrom wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of soot across her pale skin. At 6'4", she towered over every man in Copper Ridge, and her arms carried the kind of muscle that came from years of working iron. The horseshoe glowed orange under her tongs as she shaped it with precision, each strike deliberate and controlled. 18 months had passed since Lars died in the mine collapse. 18 months of whispers behind her back, of men crossing the street to avoid her, of women clutching their children closer when she walked by. She was too big, too strong, too different. The town had tolerated her when Lars was alive, but now she was just an oddity they wished would disappear. The debts hadn't disappeared, though. Lars had borrowed against the smithy to invest in a mining claim that died with him. The bank had been patient at first, but patience had limits. The shadow fell across her workbench before she heard the footsteps. Ingrid looked up to find Silas Crane standing in her doorway, his expensive coat and silver-topped cane out of place among the coal dust and metal scraps. He was thin in the way dying men get thin, his skin stretched tight over sharp bones. "Miss Nordstrom," he said, his voice carrying the rasp of bad lungs. "I've come with a business proposition." Ingrid set down her hammer. "Not interested in business with you, Mr. Crane." "Not even business that clears your debts?" He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I've purchased your outstanding loans from the bank. Every cent you owed is now owed to me." Her stomach dropped. "Why would you do that?" Silas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I'm dying, and I need a wife strong enough to run my ranch when I'm gone. I've arranged a contest. Several women will compete in a public exhibition. The winner becomes my bride and inherits everything." "You're insane." "Perhaps." He laid the paper on her bench. "But you'll participate, or I'll seize this smithy tomorrow morning. Your choice, Miss Nordstrom. Fight for your future or lose your past." He walked out before she could respond, leaving her staring at the deed to her life, now owned by a madman. Dolly Mae Pritchard had stopped being surprised by life 15 years ago. But Silas Crane's offer brought back that old familiar flutter in her chest. She stood behind the counter of her boarding house, watching him count out 50 crisp bills. $5,000. More money than she'd seen since her fighting days. "You don't even have to win," Silas said, his cough rattling through the empty dining room. "Just show up and fight. Give the crowd a proper show." She was 52 years old. Her knuckles ached on cold mornings, reminders of the bones she'd broken in St. Louis boxing rings 20 years back. She'd been the Iron Maiden then, fought men twice her size, and won more often than not. But that was before her sister died, before she'd promised to raise Caleb right, before she'd become respectable. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're the only woman in this territory who knows how to really fight. The widow's strong, but she's never thrown a proper punch in her life." Silas pushed the money across the counter. "I need this to be real, not some sad spectacle. You give me that, and this money's yours regardless of the outcome." Dolly Mae thought of Caleb's salary, barely enough to keep them fed. Thought of the boarding house roof that leaked every spring. Thought of the future she couldn't give him on what they had. "I'll do it," she said. 2 days later, She found herself at Ingrid Nordstrom's smithy, a horseshoe in hand as an excuse. The widow looked up from her work, and Dolly May understood immediately why Silas had chosen her. This woman wasn't just tall. She was powerful in a way that made men uncomfortable, made them feel small. "Help you?" Ingrid asked, her accent still carrying traces of Norway. "Need this reshaped. Horse threw it yesterday." Ingrid took the shoe, examined it with practiced eyes. "Be ready in 10 minutes. Dolly May watched her work, saw the control in every movement. This wasn't just strength. This was precision, patience. Ingrid heated the iron and began reshaping it, and in the rhythm of her hammer, Dolly May heard something she recognized, the sound of someone who'd learned to channel pain into purpose. "You're the one fighting me," Ingrid said without looking up. "News travels fast." "Small town." Ingrid dunked the horseshoe in water, steam hissing up between them. "You know this is wrong, what he's making us do." "I know. But you're doing it anyway." "Same as you." Ingrid handed over the horseshoe, their eyes meeting for the first time. "Then I guess we both do what we must." Dolly May paid and left, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just met someone who understood exactly what it cost to survive in a world that wanted you to be smaller than you were. Dr. Tobias Finch had known Silas Crane for 30 years, which was exactly why he slammed his medical bag on the rancher's desk hard enough to rattle the whiskey bottles. "This stops now," Tobias said. "You're dying, and instead of making peace, you're staging a circus." Silas looked up from his ledgers, his face gaunt in the lamplight. "I'm ensuring my legacy survives. By forcing women to beat each other. Bloody? That's not legacy, that's cruelty." "My father forced me into marriage for this land," Silas said quietly. "Caroline didn't love me. I didn't love her. We were just pieces in his game, and it killed her. Killed our son, too." He coughed into his handkerchief, spots of blood staining the white cloth. "I won't let weakness inherit what I've built. Only the strong survive out here. So you've become exactly what you hated. Your father would be proud." The words hit their mark. Silas's hand trembled as he poured himself whiskey. "Get out of my house, Tobias." But the damage was spreading beyond the ranch. By week's end, Copper Ridge had transformed into something ugly. Men arrived from 3 territories over, setting up betting stations in the street. Word of the contest drew the desperate and the curious in equal measure. Ingrid met 2 of the other contestants by accident, finding them camped near the creek behind her smithy. The first was named Ruth, a war widow whose husband died at Gettysburg. The second called herself Scarlet, though Ingrid suspected that wasn't her real name. She had the hard eyes of someone who'd worked the dance halls too long. "Why are you here?" Ingrid asked them. Ruth stared at the fire. "My children are starving. The army pension isn't enough. If I win, they eat." "I've got debts to men who don't take no for an answer," Scarlet said. "Crane's ranch is far enough away they might not find me." They sat in silence, 3 women with no good choices, only different versions of survival. Ruth pulled out a harmonica and played something low and sad. Scarlet hummed along. Ingrid found herself thinking of Lars, how he'd loved music, how he'd never made her feel like a freak for being twice the size of other women. "We shouldn't have to do this," Ruth finally said. "Any of us." "But we do," Scarlet replied. "That's the world we got." Ingrid looked at these women, saw their bruises from lives that had already beaten them down, and felt something harden in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her smithy anymore. She was fighting for all of them, for every woman who'd been backed into a corner and told to be grateful for the chance to crawl out. The knock came at 4 in the morning, soft enough that Ingrid almost missed it over the sound of her own breathing. She opened the smithy door to find Dolly May standing in the darkness, a bottle of whiskey in one hand. "Can't sleep either?" Dolly May asked. Ingrid stepped aside to let her in. They sat on empty crates near the cold forge, passing the bottle between them. The silence stretched comfortable until Dolly May broke it. "You ever been in a real fight?" "Defended myself a few times. Drunk miners mostly." "That's not the same as what's coming." Dolly May took a long drink. "Strength without technique is just flailing around hoping to connect. You'll get hurt bad if that's all you got. You offering to teach me how to beat you?" "I'm offering to make it a fair fight." Dolly May set down the bottle. "Meet me here every morning before dawn. I'll show you what I know." Ingrid studied the older woman's face, searching for the trap. "Why would you do that?" "Because Silas is paying me whether I win or lose. You lose everything if you don't win. That's not fair, and I've done enough unfair things in my life." So they began. Every morning before the sun cracked the horizon, Dolly May appeared at the smithy. She taught Ingrid footwork first, how to move despite her size, how to use her height as an advantage instead of a target. Then came the strikes, the blocks, the holds that turned strength into leverage. "Your husband," Dolly May said one morning, wrapping Ingrid's hands with cloth. "What was he like?" "Small." Ingrid smiled at the memory. 5'6". Everyone said we looked ridiculous together. He didn't care. Told me I was perfect exactly as I was. Her smile faded. "He's the only person who ever made me feel that way." "I killed a man once," Dolly May said quietly. "In the ring in St. Louis. Caught him wrong with an uppercut. He went down and never got up." She finished wrapping Ingrid's hand. "I can still see his face sometimes when I close my eyes. His wife screaming from the crowd." "Is that why you stopped fighting?" "That's why I became someone else. Thought if I was respectable long enough, I could forget what these hands did." She held up her scarred knuckles. "But you don't forget. You just learn to live with it." They trained until the sun rose, two women preparing to hurt each other, becoming friends in the process. When they finished, Dolly May pulled 2 bent nails from her pocket. "My nephew's a deputy. He taught me to pick locks with these when I was young." She pressed them into Ingrid's palm. "Just in case you ever need to open something that's locked." Ingrid closed her fingers around the gift, understanding passing between them without words. Sheriff Caleb Pritchard spread the documents across his desk, searching for anything that could stop this madness. 3 days of digging through territorial law had given him nothing but headaches, and the certainty that Silas Crane was smarter than he looked. The contest was legal. Technically, a voluntary sporting exhibition with a marriage clause. The women had signed agreements. The betting was licensed. Every detail had been crafted to slip through the gaps in frontier justice. Caleb found his aunt scrubbing floors at the boarding house that afternoon. "There has to be another way to get that money." Dolly May didn't look up. "I'm 52 years old, Caleb. Nobody's hiring me for anything that pays like this. I'll work extra shifts. We'll figure something out. You're already working yourself to death for barely enough to feed us both." She sat back on her heels, soap suds dripping from her hands. "This is my choice. Let me make it." But Caleb couldn't let it go. That evening, he rode out to Ingrid's smithy with an offer that felt like betrayal even as he spoke it. "I can get you out of town tonight. You'd have to leave everything, but you'd be free." Ingrid continued sharpening a blade, the scrape of metal on stone filling the silence. "Run away from Lars's memory? From the only thing he left me? Better than getting beaten half to death for a man you don't love. Your aunt's getting beaten too. Where's her escape plan?" The question hit harder than Caleb expected. "She's doing this by choice." "Is she?" Ingrid set down the blade. Or is she doing it because your salary isn't enough and she's got no other options? Same as me. Same as every woman in this contest. Caleb left without another word, but Ingrid's question burned in his mind. He spent the next 2 days investigating Silas Crane's finances, calling in favors from the telegraph office and the land registry. What he found made his blood run cold. Silas wasn't just dying. He was broke. The ranch was mortgaged to a bank in Denver for triple what it was worth. He'd gambled away his fortune in San Francisco last year, betting on silver mines that never produced. The whole contest was a desperate play to find someone strong enough to save his failing empire. The women weren't competing for a prize. They were competing for a burden. Caleb gathered the documents and rode hard for the ranch, but when he arrived, Silas was in bed, coughing blood into a basin. Dr. Tobias met him at the door. He won't see anyone. He's got maybe 2 weeks left. I need to stop this fight. Then you better move fast, Tobias said, because it's happening Sunday, right after church, and half the territory's already here to watch. Saturday arrived with the smell of roasting meat and sawdust. Copper Ridge had transformed overnight into something between a carnival and a battlefield. Betting booths lined the main street. Merchants hawked food and whiskey. Families arrived in wagons from as far as 3 territories away, children running wild, while their fathers placed bets on blood. Ingrid forced herself to attend Sunday morning service, walking into the church while conversations died around her. She sat in the back pew, feeling every eye on her like brands against her skin. The preacher chose his text carefully, the story of David facing Goliath, and Ingrid wondered if he realized he'd cast her as the giant everyone hoped would fall. But after the service, something unexpected happened. Women approached her on the church steps, women who'd crossed the street to avoid her for 18 months. They pressed her hands, whispered words of encouragement. One old grandmother cupped Ingrid's face and said, "You show them what we're worth." At the boarding house, Dolly May experienced the same strange blessing. The women staying there treated her like a warrior heading to battle, bringing her coffee and biscuits she couldn't eat, telling her stories of men who'd wronged them, hurts they'd swallowed because they had no other choice. "Make him pay for all of it," one young bride said, her eye still bruised from her husband's fist. The weight of it settled on both women like armor they hadn't asked to wear. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for every woman who'd been told to be smaller, quieter, less. Late afternoon, Ingrid worked her forge one last time, heating iron until it glowed. She shaped 2 rings from horseshoe nails, rough and simple, but strong. When Dolly May arrived at dusk, Ingrid pressed one into her palm. "Sisters in steel," Ingrid said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we're not enemies." Dolly May slipped the ring onto her finger. "Whoever wins helps the other. That's the pact. That's the pact." They sat together in the dying light, not speaking, both knowing sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. The sound of hammering drifted through the window as workers finished building the fighting ring in the town square. Laughter and fiddle music rose from the saloon. The whole town was celebrating what would happen to them tomorrow. Silas Crane appeared in the doorway like a ghost, his skin gray, his breathing labored. He looked at the 2 women, saw the rings on their fingers, and something flickered across his face that might have been regret. "Tomorrow at noon," he said. "Don't be late." After he left, Dolly May broke the silence. "You ready for this?" "No," Ingrid said. "You?" "Not even a little." They laughed then, bitter and brief. 2 women preparing to destroy each other because the world had left them no other option. The crowd numbered in the hundreds by noon, packed around the wooden ring like vultures circling prey. Silas sat in an ornate chair at ringside, coughing blood into silk handkerchiefs, a dying king watching his empire crumble. Caleb stood near the back, his hand resting on the documents in his coat, waiting for the right moment. Ruth fought first, facing a rancher's daughter who outweighed her by 50 pounds. It ended quickly, Ruth on her back in the dirt, nose bleeding. Scarlett lasted longer against a woman from the mining camps, trading vicious blows until both collapsed from exhaustion. Scarlett won by staying conscious 3 seconds longer. Then Dolly May entered the ring. She moved like memory itself, decades of training flowing back into her muscles. The rancher's daughter went down in 2 minutes. The mining camp woman lasted 4. Dolly May's knuckles bled, but her eyes stayed cold and focused, the Iron Maiden returning from retirement for one last performance. Ingrid faced her opponents with different tactics. She used her reach, her strength, keeping distance and controlling the fight without cruelty. When Ruth came at her desperate and wild, Ingrid simply held her at arm's length until the widow tired herself out. When Scarlett tried dirty tricks, Ingrid absorbed the punishment and responded with precision strikes that ended it cleanly. Finally, only 2 remained. Ingrid and Dolly May stood across the ring from each other, while the crowd roared for blood. They touched fists, a gesture so small most people missed it, but it meant everything to them. The fight began technical and controlled. Dolly May danced and jabbed, using footwork to avoid Ingrid's power. Ingrid stayed patient, remembering everything she'd learned in those dawn training sessions, using her height to keep Dolly May at range. They circled each other like chess players, neither landing devastating blows, both showing too much respect. The crowd grew angry. They'd paid for violence, for spectacle, for women tearing each other apart. Someone threw a bottle into the ring. Then another. Shouts of, "Fight proper," and "Make it real," echoed from all sides. Silas struggled to his feet, his voice cracking as he yelled, "Fight like you mean it, or neither of you gets anything!" Something shifted in the air between them. They'd made a pact to help each other, but they'd also made agreements with Silas, with debt collectors, with survival itself. The crowd's rage pressed down like a physical weight, demanding the cruelty they'd promised to avoid. Dolly May's eyes met Ingrid's across the ring, and in that look passed an apology for what had to come next. They began fighting for real then, technique and power colliding with brutal honesty, fists connected with flesh. Blood flew. The crowd finally got what it wanted, and both women hated themselves for giving it to them. Blood streamed from Ingrid's split eyebrow, blurring her vision. Dolly May's lip had split open, her left eye swelling shut. They'd been fighting for 20 minutes that felt like hours, both exhausted, both refusing to quit. The crowd had gone from roaring to silent, watching something they'd demanded, but no longer wanted to see. In a clinch, their faces inches apart, Dolly May whispered, "Forgive me." Before Ingrid could respond, Dolly May drove her thumb into the pressure point below Ingrid's ear, a street fighting trick she'd sworn never to use again. Pain exploded through Ingrid's skull. Her legs buckled. She went down hard, dust rising around her like a final curtain. The crowd erupted. Dolly May stood over Ingrid's body, her own legs shaking, blood dripping from her chin into the dirt. She looked down at her friend, at the woman she'd trained and laughed with, now unconscious because of her, and felt something break inside her chest that had nothing to do with physical injury. Silas rose from his chair, raising one skeletal hand for silence. "The winner is Dolly May Pritchard. Come forward and accept your prize." Dolly Mae walked to the edge of the ring, each step heavier than the last. The crowd parted. Silas extended his hand, holding the deed to his ranch, his fortune, his legacy. The thing she'd beaten her friend unconscious to claim. She looked at the paper, looked at Silas's dying face, looked back at Ingrid, now being helped to sitting position by Dr. Tobias. "No," Dolly Mae said. The word dropped into silence like a stone, into still water. "What?" Silas's hand trembled. "I won't marry you." Dolly Mae's voice grew stronger. "This whole thing was barbarism dressed up as entertainment. I'm ashamed I participated. I'm ashamed I hurt that woman for your sick game." She pulled the money he'd given her from her pocket and threw it at his feet. "Keep your blood money. Keep your ranch. I want no part of it." Dolly Mae climbed back into the ring and helped Ingrid stand. The crowd stood frozen, unsure how to react to a prize being refused. Silas's face turned purple. "You signed a contract. I'll have you both arrested." Caleb stepped forward, pulling documents from his coat. "Try it, Crane, and I'll file these with the territorial court tomorrow. Your ranch is mortgaged for 3 times its value. You've got gambling debts in 4 cities. You're broke, and everyone here is about to know it." Silas opened his mouth, then began coughing violently, blood spattering his expensive suit. He collapsed back into his chair, and Dr. Tobias rushed forward. "He needs bed rest immediately," Tobias announced. "This spectacle is over." In the chaos that followed, Ingrid and Dolly Mae slipped away together, leaving behind the crowd, the money, the dying rancher, and the fight that had nearly destroyed them both. 3 days later, Silas Crane died alone in his bed, except for Dr. Tobias, who held his hand through the final rattling breaths. The entire town attended the funeral, not out of respect, but curiosity about what would happen to his ranch. The will reading happened that same afternoon in the territorial office. Caleb, Ingrid, and Dolly Mae stood in the back while the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. "To the strongest woman in Copper Ridge, I leave my ranch and all holdings." The lawyer paused, looking up. "Mr. Crane has named both Ingrid Nordstrom and Dolly Mae Pritchard as co-inheritors." The room exploded in whispers. The lawyer raised his hand for quiet. "There is one condition. Both women must run the ranch together for a minimum of 5 years, or the property reverts to the Bank of Denver to settle outstanding debts. They have 24 hours to accept or decline." Outside, Ingrid and Dolly Mae stood in the street, still processing what they'd just heard. The bruises on their faces had yellowed, painful reminders of what they'd endured. "He trapped us again," Dolly Mae said. "Even dead, he's still manipulating us." "Or maybe he finally did something right," Ingrid replied. "We earned this, through pain, but we earned it." They rode out to the ranch that evening. A Mexican woman met them at the door, her face weathered but kind. "I am Socorro. I kept house for Mr. Crane for 12 years. She walked them through the property, showing them rooms thick with dust, a kitchen that needed work, a barn with good bones but failing roof. As they walked, Socorro talked. He was different before his wife died. The grief made him cruel, but underneath, there was still a man who wanted to do right. This ranch could be something good again, with the right people. Ingrid stood on the porch, looking out over acres of land that rolled toward distant mountains. She thought of her tiny smithy, of 18 months spent alone, of Lars's dream that they'd have space to breathe. "We could build something here," she said quietly. Dolly Mae joined her, both women staring at their unlikely inheritance, People will talk. They'll say we're crazy, trying to run a ranch without men. Let them talk. They've been talking about me my whole life. The work will be brutal. I'm not afraid of hard work." Dolly Mae extended her hand, the horseshoe nail ring still on her finger. "Partners, then?" Ingrid shook it, her own matching ring catching the sunset light. "Sisters in steel." The next morning, they signed the papers. By afternoon, they were moving their belongings to the ranch that had been bought with their blood and friendship. Ruth and Scarlett showed up at dusk, asking if there might be work for women who had nowhere else to go. Ingrid and Dolly Mae looked at each other and smiled. 6 months transformed the Crane Ranch into something the territory had never seen. The name changed first. People started calling it the Sister Ranch, and the name stuck like honey on wood. Ingrid built a new forge in the north barn, the sound of her hammer ringing across the valley at dawn. Dolly Mae managed the books and hired hands, her years running the boarding house teaching her how to stretch every dollar until it screamed. Ruth brought her children from back east, and they filled the house with laughter it hadn't heard in years. Scarlett proved brilliant with horses, gentling wild mustangs that grown men couldn't touch. Socorro taught them all to cook proper meals, the kitchen becoming the heart where they planned each day over coffee and fresh bread. The neighboring ranchers mocked them at first. Women trying to run a ranch? It would fail before winter. But when spring came and the sister ranch produced the finest horses in 3 territories, the mockery turned to jealousy. Ingrid's metalwork became sought after, her horseshoes and tools known for quality that outlasted anything made by men. Money remained tight, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. One evening in late summer, Ingrid and Dolly Mae sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The scars on their faces had faded, but would never fully disappear. Neither woman minded. They'd earned those scars together. "You think this is what Silas wanted?" Dolly Mae asked. "When he wrote that will?" "I think he wanted to control us, even after death," Ingrid said. "But we took his control and made it freedom instead." A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. As she got closer, they saw it was a young woman, maybe 18, with a black eye and terror written across her face. She dismounted, nearly falling from exhaustion. "Please," she gasped. "My father's trying to force me to marry a man twice my age. I heard about this place, that women here help each other. I have nowhere else to go." Ingrid and Dolly Mae exchanged glances, an entire conversation passing between them in silence. They'd built something bigger than a ranch. They'd built a refuge, a place where women who'd been backed into corners could find their way out. "What's your name?" Dolly Mae asked. "Emma." "Well, Emma, you're safe now." Ingrid stood, her full height blocking out the setting sun. "Come inside. We'll figure this out together." As they walked Emma toward the house, Socorro already warming soup on the stove, Ingrid thought about that terrible day in the ring. The blood, the pain, the humiliation. It had nearly destroyed them both. But somehow, through violence and friendship and stubborn refusal to be broken, they'd created something worth fighting for. Not a prize given by a dying man, but a home built by women who refused to stay down. If you enjoyed this incredible story of survival and sisterhood, click that like button and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's amazing tale. These women turned cruelty into kindness, and we'll be back with another beautiful story that proves strength comes in unexpected forms.